All right, welcome back to Coaches Exploring Clarity. Elaine, and Greg back to dive in deep again on Jamie Smart's second edition of Clarity. And today we're going to be starting with Chapter 8, The Ultimate Leverage Point, which starts off with a quote from Thomas Kuhn. The historian of science may be tempted to exclaim that when paradigms change, the world itself changes with them. Anyway, I know I say this every time, but I really like this chapter. I kind of fell in love with paradigms when I was studying 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and realized how powerful it is when you shift from one paradigm to a new paradigm, to the point where I started looking for paradigms, like where am I caught up in a paradigm that isn't serving me, or when I worked in retail and dealt with stores or vendors, like trying to understand what paradigm they were acting out of. Because if I could understand their paradigm, it was much easier to manipulate them. I mean, collaborate with them.
Have you had a recent discovery, Greg, on a paradigm that you were operating of that wasn't working for you?
Yeah, well, I have them all the time. This weekend, Elaine and I were on a course together, and the I don't know if it was the main theme, but at the beginning there was this a theme of you're either enrolling somebody else in your version of the world, or they're enrolling you in theirs. So their version of the world is analogous to paradigm. Anyway, so I started thinking, I made a word cloud post on my Facebook of the words that describe my version of the world that I'm currently living in. And they were words like love, joy, fun, abundance, clarity, possibility, potential, and things like that. I think I had a dozen words or so. But when I think back to during my career, if I had words to describe my world, it would have been stress, frustration, accomplishment. I don't know, just a much different list of words to describe what my world used to be. And the reason it hit me this weekend was on Thursday, I'd taken my dad to the hospital for an appointment, just as a follow-up thing, but we were delayed for like 2 hours. So we just had a chance to sit there and talk. And just the way he was describing his existence at the retirement home things, he said something to me, something like, I'm just here till I die, or I'm here to die. And I thought, well, that's a pretty dark version of your world to live out the rest of your days with I'm just waiting to die, basically. And so as we talked about it, I said, well, how about if you looked at it this way, like you're there to live until you die? Is that that's a much different way of looking at the same situation. Anyway, we had a great conversation. I don't know that I changed his perspective all that much, but I think I was pointing him to a new paradigm, a new way of looking at his situation, which hopefully will prove to be helpful for him. Oh, you're on mute, Elaine, somehow.
Sorry, guys, I'm on mute because they're knocking the wall down through in the next flat. So I just keep the noise down, while I'm not speaking. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, I kind of got into a bit stuck thinking about paradigms because, indeed, that this is what Jamie is pointing to. Because in a sense of time, like it seems that the previous, let's say, paradigms, and Jamie makes the example, I think not in this chapter, but later on of the germ theory, if you like. Once people started understanding that germs actually did exist, then they started, sterilizing stuff, and operations became more successful, and so on. And people understood how to then develop a cure for, in that case, cholera at the time, or whatever it was, and so on. As I guess we're kind of on the front edge or the back edge, I'm not quite sure, of this paradigm. That everything is thought generated perceptual reality. because noticing how it took sort of a long time, was it Semmelweis or whoever it was that realized or saw this thing about germs, or that it must be something, and connected that up, and then was able to, let's say, put it out in the world, and then that people were actually able to believe it and then act upon it. Apparently in that story there was something, I don't know, it was more than 50 years went by,
Yeah.
Before there was any kind of inkling just to take it on board. So whereas, now happily today there are many people, thanks to Sydney Banks and so forth, and Jamie Smart himself, and now us,
Yeah.
I'm wondering how long it'll take, and if because of technology or because of anything, will the time be less? Will it be more? Or is that indeed also, let's say, the time limitation, if I'm going to call it, something to do with our own thought-generated perceptual reality? And is that going to change as well?
Yeah.
That made any sense? Yeah, that's what I thought about that. Yeah.
I'll let Lynne dive
Well,
in.
obviously the answer is we don't know. Like we don't know anything.
Question to mind,
Yeah,
food
we
for
don't know.
thought.
We don't know. But
It's food
it
for
is food
thought,
for thought, is it?
because it's one thing, looking back at saying, oh, science has done this and that, this, that, and the other, and yet we are actually sitting in the midst of this extraordinary new paradigm. It's not sort of really been revealed, and it's not just accepted as true across the board.
Yeah, most people don't even know about it.
Yeah.
Until they watch this program.
Of course. Yeah. And so
and I would I don't know if I beg to differ, or I'm not quite sure, but it's not necessarily in this way, but if you look back over centuries at Buddhism or many other forms where within there's a belief that we are generating whatever we feel. So it might not be said in this way and laid out in this manner, or transmitted or communicated, but I'm not quite sure that it hasn't been there and that people haven't seen it. Is it that it hasn't come out in such a way that is universally accepted, that is day to day, that is, in our mainstream? If you take another example right now, taking mindfulness into schools, for example, that's a new thing. That wouldn't have happened when we were at school. People coming to us and having any notion that how we were and how we dealt with our minds was as a child was going to help us and be helpful for us going forward. So I'm not sure that a notion of this hasn't been there. I just wonder if it hasn't been a norm, a paradigm that's been recognised and in our normal way of being. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah. What's the thing that occurs to me when you're describing like things like mindfulness and mental health education, getting into the educational system, it's like it's a reactive, at least my impression of it is it's society reacting to a decline in mental health amongst young people. So we must get these programs into schools to show them there's a different way to live because of all the negative impacts they're having, rather than like it's a response to something rather than a proactive kind of doing this because I've had an insight and been enlightened and have to share this. It's so maybe we will get there, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a problem, but it's it just seems a little backwards to me in terms of how we're going about it as a society. That maybe that's for another day.
That'll be chapter 20.
Yeah. Yeah. I noted again in this chapter, similar to what we've talked about up to this point, is the repetitive nature of just pounding away on how our experiences created. Like on page 95, when he's describing level 4, the nature of thought. Our experience of the world is created from the inside out via the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, insightfully understanding what's behind the scenes of our experience can lead to a profound transformation, increasing clarity, security, and peace of mind. So again, that, and I really liked this little image that he has of level 1, which is downstream material reality, level 2, content of thought, level 3, structure of thought, and now level 4, nature of thought, as being upstream. And each of those is a paradigm shift from the previous one, and kind of, as I was going through this chapter and reading it, kind of, not that I've struggled with the idea of going upstream with my clients and stuff, but it just hit me in a different way this time through the chapter of like, oh, that's what this means. And then I had a whole bunch of ideas for how I can do that and bring my clients, up the ladder, so to speak, into understanding the nature of thought.
That's interesting, because when I read these 2 chapters again on Sunday, and speaking of the nature of thought and how it impacts us, it's Sunday and it's sunny, and I was on my terrace with Clarity thinking, I'm doing my homework, and I really, I was in the space of, I don't want to be reading this today. As a result of, I don't want to be reading this today, I felt a bit irked, and it wasn't going in. So I didn't have my highlighter pen. Yeah. I didn't have my pencil. I read the paragraphs, and a couple of things hit me. I was like, yeah. And then this morning, when I read this one specifically again, where a few examples of my past few days, so circumstances, conversations with family, with a couple of clients, to the point of a message from a client 20 minutes or 25 minutes before we got on this call. That little downstream, upstream, what do you call that?
Diagram.
Thank you very much. Just from that, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's this. Thinking back to conversations and where this looks to be so helpful, so very helpful, where someone turns up and they say, oh, I'm not getting through this, and it looks like this, I've got this problem going on today. If I react where they are in the material reality or the content of their thought, we're just going to get stuck there. That's just going to be, oh, this is a problem, and how are you going to solve the problem, and what's going to make you do it, what's going to motivate you to do it, and so the spiral goes. Whereas as you move on through the structure to the actual nature of it, that's where the problem falls away. And I have examples of this for myself in the past couple of weeks as well. So just the beauty of that little diagram, and from a noticing perspective, for us just to go boom, 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 boom. Oh yeah, it's so helpful as an image, as a visual for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, one thing that struck me, generally speaking, throughout the book, is through the book as well, how things have changed over time. It's like a new paradigm. How books are now much more dynamic because of images, and how somehow it does seem to be more. Things seem to be more impressed on your mind when you have an image to grip onto, which sort of appeals to people have different ways of learning. And how even that is a change in paradigm, if you like, in learning itself. So yeah, and I like that. Dead simple. downstream, upstream. That's that. End of story. And the only place you can go is upstream to get anything. What the other thing that struck me after that, because Jamie in this part is still talking about movies, and the idea of how the Lumiere brothers, or what it was, they put out that first ever moving photographs, if you like, and people were terrified with the idea of the train might come out of the screen and get them or whatever, just as he as a little boy describes himself. How terrifying certain scenes from the Wizard of Oz were, the flying monkeys or whatever they were. And it struck me, and it was rather a worrying thought, because like all this points to what people are like secretly looking for is sort of peace and tranquility and serenity and just kind of some sort of clarity and calm, quiet understanding of how we actually work, so that we can move forward in the best way possible in our lives. And how there's an enormous number of people, as well as the people who have created today's movies, which are requiring 3D goggles, so that people can have that experience of pure terror as they're watching a movie. And that really struck me. I thought, well, it's almost as if we're actually not, although of course clarity will point us to the fact that we're already created to be serene, peaceful, loving, wonderful, understanding human beings, the clear mind and clear purpose sort of thing in life. But it looks like today's generations are seeking that thing that subtractive psychology is trying to get us away from, and how to feel terrified on a day-to-day basis. That was quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think the
they're seeking an experience that somehow is not there through the 3D movie, whether it's terrifying or even just an experience of, flying or something like that because of the nature of the movie sort of thing, and your 3D goggles or whatever. You're seeking that experience, which is, of course, you can have anyway. If you want it, why go looking for it?
Yeah. Well, the thing that jumped out at me at the end of that section of the paragraph on page 96 was, he says they can still be deeply affected by a movie, but they know their well-being isn't at risk.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can go and watch a horror movie or a whatever and really allow myself to be fooled into thinking this is real, knowing that it isn't. And then as soon as the lights come back on, I'm okay. Like I'm not, not bothered by
But what
it.
I'm saying is, why the 3D viewing goggles?
Yeah.
To sort of need to be in there when you also know that you can't be. You're just in a pair of goggles.
Yeah. Well, when you, I would say, because this is a conversation my wife and I have often, because I love 3D movies. She hates them. They make her nauseous. So we always, when the new movies come out, it's like, well, are we going to go see it in IMAX 3D or in, regular? And of course she always wins. So, but it helps me more fully immerse myself in the illusion of the experience of the movie. So it's like, I love being fooled to that third dimension.
Yeah. When you secretly know it's not true.
Yeah. It reminds me of, people would be like, I like all the Marvel movies, and people will poke holes in different plots or different scenes and say, well, that would never have happened. And it's like, oh, like we're pretending people have like superpowers and things. And the thing that you have a problem with is that, like, this scenario doesn't seem realistic, when none of it's realistic. Like it's all made up entirely.
Yeah, it's all made up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then moving on from that same thought, if that is so, and Jamie even says, once a on page 99, once a paradigm is established, it renders many pre-paradigm theories obsolete. So I'm wondering then, I guess, what's going to happen after this? Are we in the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension? What happens after all of this?
Yeah.
Is there anything beyond
Yeah.
the principle of thought taking form in the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting question, because when we're in our current paradigm and we can see how it made all the previous paradigms obsolete, it's easy to fall into the arrogance of thinking we finally have found the paradigm.
Yeah.
But the person that was in the paradigm right before this one, they thought that was the paradigm.
Yeah.
and all the way back in time. So it's unlikely that any paradigm that we have currently is the paradigm. It's more likely that things will continue to evolve and change. I think I can't remember the exact term. It's something like anything that's in our perceptual field and through devices and things. So as our technology changes and we can start seeing things that, so kind of like your reference to the germ theory thing, like until even when germs were theoretically thought of, until they had a microscope where they could actually see them, it was still hard for people to believe that it was a thing. So as technology increases and our ability to see things becomes clearer, I'd be in the camp of if I had to bet my money, I'd bet that there'll be other paradigms beyond this or other paradigms that we have in our lives. And I'm reminded of, the paradigm is just a map of the territory. It's not the territory itself. So, I don't think we've seen everything that there is to be seen, for sure.
Yeah, fascinating.
And to your point, Lynn, about thinking about those that diagram with the different levels in it on 98, it says there's a huge difference between intervening in an existing perceptual reality versus looking upstream at what's creating that perceptual reality. If a person doesn't understand that they're feeling the principle of thought taking form in the moment, they'll accept what the perception has to tell them about those feelings. Thought creates the world and then says, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
That's what I had a session yesterday with somebody, and it was so helpful taking them upstream because they were so caught up in the content of their thinking and were so busy around that and so convinced that it was real. And then when we started unraveling and exploring, like, what do you make of that? Or what's your theory about why that's happening? Is that actually real or true for that person and for yourself? Anyway, it's like magic. I'm sure you guys have had the experience of like taking people upstream and the magic that happens when they see the nature of thought.
I think it's especially helpful when I don't know what your conversation was based on, Greg, but when people come and it's always the other person is doing X to make me feel Y. I think it's where it's within relationships, and it doesn't matter if it's a family relationship, a work relationship, or someone annoying you in the street, doesn't really matter. But I think it's particularly helpful there to get people out of the story and to point them to what is true. Because we do not naturally think like that. It's not how we naturally think. So, and again, that's last week, I think we were on habits. And when you talk about mental habits, once you start to be able to think like that for yourself, the easier irks and problems they don't necessarily just fall away, but we can see them. And you said at the top end of the call, not much doesn't not much annoys me, and I'm like, yeah, these days,
Yeah.
I bet you could make a list from a few years ago of all the little things that annoyed you, but now that you see them, you just
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
annoyances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Traffic is the biggest one. It still annoys me, but not nearly as deeply or for as long. Like I can catch myself very quickly being annoyed with traffic to the point where it makes me laugh now. Like it's almost like a little joke on myself.
Bet those other drivers are happy about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I did want to point out on page 99 the specific reference to um, Sydney Banks' discovery. So it says what Sydney Banks' discovery of the principles underlying experience makes possible in the realization of a single paradigm, a worldview underpinning the theories and methodologies of all aspects of psychology. And to your point, Elaine, like, Sid Banks died in 2009 or something, and he had his enlightenment experience 50 years ago in 1973. And here we are. I mean, we're on this call, and we know there's a big three principles community, but as a percentage of the world's population, it's virtually non-existent. So it's like these may be the principles of psychology, but I would suggest that most of psychology doesn't know about them in terms of the establishment, I guess, of psychology, and that it's a matter of time before they do similar to. And I don't know if you could draw a parallel to how long it took, like germ theory or any of these other major paradigm shifts in society to take hold, but maybe it is a 100-year process. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that's true in a Western world, but in my experience of as a shiatsu practitioner, which follows sort of everything that is Buddhist philosophy or traditional Chinese medicine. I mean, these guys already have all of this. I mean, providing you are a Tibetan monk, sort of thing. So, and I kind of ask, I guess that was a little bit in the question that I posed to myself, to anybody, that they already had this stuff. And when they were teaching this stuff, they didn't even have a book to teach from, nor had anybody actually written the book of how to teach this stuff. But what their let's say their method of, I'm just trying to think of the right word, because if it's not teaching, what is it? Well, let's say education, then, as Jamie describes from the Latin origin of the word, to lead out from within, was indeed that. So like if you look at, something like Tai Chi, the big masters of Tai Chi, I'll just sign up for a Tai Chi lesson today and off you go. They do not say a word. You just walk in and you just copy the master. And that is the teaching. So and which points exactly to the fact that it's because it's already there. But these kind of movements and such like will point you in the direction of that, which is that which is within, which is the only thing kind of you need to move forward in life. So, and that's been around for thousands of years, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years, BC something. And like we still haven't got it. I guess that was what was going on in my mind. Yeah.
Those people are looking at us and going, those people in the Western world, they're a bit slow.
Yeah. And they, but not only the Western world's takes the larger bite, because many Chinese and Japanese and Asian people, Indian people, they want the big apple. They want the American way, the Western world. They want that, which again is a huge sort of opposition. It's the opposition party that we're dealing with, if you like.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a wonderful journey, big or not. Yeah.
How about we wrap this one up with the thought experiment at the end, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
So I'll read on page 102, the thought experiment. One of the more profound implications of the principles behind clarity is this: you don't need to control, monitor, or manage your thinking. What happens when you stop for a moment and deeply consider that?
Yeah. With this chapter, it makes perfect sense. How difficult, though, is that? You like to really do that. What happens when you stop for a moment? Oh my God, I've lost control.
Yeah.
We know we hang on to that control, got to control, manage, and that's what we are doing every day, every breath we take. We're sort of desperately attempting to control or manage either ourselves or somebody else or something else.
Yeah.
Even how to handle a toaster in the morning kind of thing can sometimes be a big deal.
Well, I think that speaks directly to what we have been conditioned to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we have been conditioned to do since we have been children. We've been conditioned to monitor ourselves, manage ourselves, control feelings, impulses, actions. That those things are what we have been conditioned to do. So it goes against what we've been told our nature is, not what our nature is, interestingly.
Yeah.
What we've been told our nature is, but not what our nature is. Yeah.
So the implications of the principles behind clarity is just fabulous. Think about it. It almost becomes like a no-brainer. But the step into that is kind of, as I see it, is another thing. But I guess even seeing that it is another thing, then it kind of helps working with people to be able to see that. It also provides, I guess, our own journeys in the book, in our day-to-day, now that we have, a certain level of understanding. It actually increases our own, love and understanding towards other people, that it might take a bit of time, but that's okay. So even that is quite an implication in itself. It's sort of kind of motivating, I suppose. Hopeful.
I think of it in the context a lot of increasing my love and understanding for myself, of not beating myself up for why am I thinking this way, or why am I doing this, or there I go again getting mad at somebody who doesn't have their signal on when they're turning, whatever it is. So it's, to me, it's freedom is the big word that pops out at me when you understand that you don't have to control, monitor, or manage your thinking. It's like, that's freedom from not having to do that.
Beautiful, Greg.
That's not the first time I've read that thought experiment, but when you were reading it, Greg, and when you got to the last, what happens when you stop for a moment and deeply consider that. So I wasn't even deeply considering it. I just kind of felt like, that's a load off. It's like, oh yay. Imagine. And then, of course, I can't help going back to kids again. Imagine if kids knew that was an okay way to be. If we could take it right back to there, and they weren't having this conversation when they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, if they hadn't been conditioned to control, monitor, manage their thinking, their feelings, their everything. It seems like that what happens would be an easier.
For sure. All right. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.